talk for a bit about Scottish politics, or the turmoil, the turbulence that is Scottish politics. The day after the resignation of Humza Yousaf as First Minister of Scotland and leader of the SNP, there were sort of illustrations and lessons and thoughts which apply across politics, across the UK, not just in Scotland, although it is a fascinating story in its own Scottish context. I mean, Rachel, the immediate question now, of course, is this one of, will there be a contest for the leadership of the SNP and the First Minister's job in Scotland, or will there be a coronation? I mean, there's no easy answer to that. A coronation looks like a stitch-up, and a contest could be really messy.
Well, you basically summed it up there. I mean, no party really wants to air all its dirty laundry in public, and one of the things that has become apparent since Nicola Sturgeon stepped down as leader of the SNP is that all those years that we thought that the SNP was just more cohesive, more disciplined, just better at being a political party than the Westminster parties, it turned out they were having all of the usual dirty party disputes and rows and all the rest of it. They just had a very strong message discipline sort of on the surface, and now that's gone. You're seeing it kind of fall apart in real time. However, that's kind of how the democratic process is meant to work. That's kind of how political parties maintain their relevance and maintain the energy around them, is by having quite robust contests about ideas and about leadership. And if you just parachute somebody in and say, yeah, we think this person won't make it any worse, so they're a grown-up, they'll steady the ship. I mean, you get a sense of deja vu about Rishi Sunak in the post-Liz Truss era. That doesn't really make you look great either, and has the potential to really antagonise party members. So I don't think it's an easy decision for them. I don't think it's an easy decision for Kate Forbes either, who is considering running again. Obviously, she was given quite a rough time just over a year ago when she ran against Humza Yousaf, and I think she's probably thinking through her options quite carefully. But I think probably if you want the party to succeed and heal and have a chance of recovering, you probably need to get those arguments out in the open rather than pretending they don't exist by just installing somebody as a successor. That's my advice to the SNP if they're listening, which they probably wouldn't be taking advice from me anyway, and nor should they. But that's my 2 cents on it.
Right, Tim, between Kate Forbes and John Swinney, you got well, if nothing else, a real choice. Very different visions politically, a very different set of values on either side when it comes to those two candidates. Maybe for that reason, it would be right to have a contest.
Yeah, well, depends whether you're from the SNP's perspective or from the perspective of a unionist. I would like a really bloody contest where the party tears itself apart. I think it's very important we have a coherent opposition in politics. If you have a one-party rule, which is part of the problem we've had in Scotland, problems of the kind that are now dogging the former SNP leadership of potential, I know it's alleged misuse of funds, they aren't examined in the proper way. It's vital to have a functioning opposition, but I'd rather have a functioning unionist opposition in Scotland than a nationalist opposition. And so I want them to have a bloody contest, take chunks out of each other, and the union be safe. And a very good article on the front of the Scottish Daily Mail today by Andrew Neil says that perhaps the union is safer now than it's been in a generation because the SNP have made such a mess of things. And I try not to take too much pleasure in other parties' misfortune, but full confession, I'm really enjoying this meltdown of the SNP.
Well, that's fair enough, I suppose. I mean, here's me trying to be high-minded and sort of, egging on a healthy democratic debate and rival visions, just, testing each other's strength and giving the majority, the result when it comes to a fair vote of the party membership. And there's you, Tim, saying, you're rubbing your hands over, there's blood all over the floor. And I see it, because the Labour Party are going to be feeling exactly the same way, maybe more so, because they're even more obviously the winners from all of this. Yeah. But, again, a lot of this translates across politics, across our country and beyond. Because in Kate Forbes, you're looking at a candidate who thinks the SNP took a wrong turn on some of these big culture issues. In John Swinney, you've got someone who isn't in line with the way of things were done in the past. So they both look for a departure. Kate for a radical departure. And those are lessons which are being chewed over on both sides of the border and across the UK, aren't they, Rachel?
Well, I think there's a quite interesting point about the SNP as a party, which is that it has managed to attract people from really quite different political persuasions. And were it not for the single issue of an independent Scotland, would Kate Forbes and John Swinney be in the same party?
Well, you could say the same about all sorts of parties.
Yes, but I think what's interesting about the SNP specifically is that it has tried to build a coalition for independent Scotland that agrees on that point, but doesn't. The idea was you didn't have to agree on anything else. You didn't have to agree on fiscal conservatism or state spending or energy policy or a lot of the gender, social progressive, self-ID, all of culture war stuff. You don't have to agree on any of that. We need an independent Scotland, and then we'll be able to have those debates as an independent country. That's always been the sort of defining mission. So I think more, of course, other parties have a broad range of views and debates, and of course there's a wide range within the Conservative Party, which we're seeing now, and in Labour, which we're not seeing now, but we know that it exists. But I think it is more pronounced in a party that is single mission, has a single mission, as it were, and I think because the SNP has been such a good campaigning force over the last decade, those fundamental questions of, but okay, let's say you got an independent Scotland, what would you do there? What would that look like? That debate hasn't really been had because they haven't needed to. As Tim said, you need to have an opposition in order to sort of drill down and work out what the party thinks about X, Y, Z. I think they've been given a bit of a free pass. So I think they should have the leadership debate, not because I want to see them tear themselves apart as Tim does in quite that way, but I think it would be good for them as well to work out, okay, beyond this single issue, you've been in government, what is it that what's your vision for an independent Scotland other than it just being not part of the UK?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the SNP do now sit, underneath that sort of centre-left umbrella now as a party, but there are very different traditions. I mean, I can remember the central belt of Scotland. That was the sort of traditional, sort of more left-of-centre strain. Further to the north, you've got some that used to be called tartan Tories. Now they march much more in step, but there are very clear differences here, which are going to just about to become much more apparent. But Tim, I mean, you're enjoying the bloodletting and hopefully for more bloodletting to come, but you're also a Conservative. And look at Labour. I mean, you got the great John Curtis now talking about, the Labour Party picking up 28 seats to the SNP's 18 on the current run of the polls. You can't be celebrating that.
Well, look, I don't want a Labour government, that's true, but I think it's going to happen. And I think perhaps if Keir Starmer is sensible, and I think he is pretty sensible, he's certainly quite cautious, I think he will learn a very important lesson from what's happened to the SNP recently. He's going to be running a country, if he wins the election, without much money in the Treasury coffers. And I think the temptation when you haven't got money in the coffers is to throw red meat to your own supporters, or maybe in the case of the left, vegan sausages or something. I don't know what the equivalent is. And the temptation must be for him to do sort of cultural reforms that the left of his party want. And I think the lesson from Scotland, where the SNP have had to appease their coalition partners in the Green Party, is actually you do that at your own peril. The British people, I think, on a lot of moral issues are quite conservative with a small c. And the trans issue really has alienated the SNP perhaps more than any other issue from the Scottish people. And I think it's underlining a lot of the popularity problems that they're facing. So if he's wise, he will be learning the right lessons of this issue and not appeasing his left on cultural issues, as well as he's already learned the lesson not to appease them on economic issues.